running the conversation and how things are going in your territory. So joining me today, you'll see both of us on the video stream, is my partner Peter Houstel, and I'm Peggy Hoffman, and together we're going to guide you through this conversation around tracking chapter effectiveness. Okay, so about the host, just so you know who's here and what we're doing. So delighted always to be partners with the crew at BillHighway. They are, of course, the solution engine for whether you're talking about chapters that need tools to automate and simplify operations, or just their database. Their resource bank has got lots of information to help you optimize your chapters. And of course, don't forget that the second half of this is Mariner. It's Peter and Peggy, and we love chapters. That's what you need to know about us. And we think that the better we can do to optimize those chapters, the better we all are. So what brings us here? Well, what brings us here is that we're really excited about building a community and connecting all of the associations that have components and all of the professionals who work with them, so that we can make our jobs easier, make our members more satisfied, and move the mission of the organization. Today's conversation is about dashboards. And I want you to know the way this came about was there was an interesting conversation on Collaborate in which someone had posted they were looking for ways to create dashboards to help their chapter leaders understand what was going on and do some benchmarking and comparison. And there was a bunch of people who said, me too, me too, me too, but not many people that had an example. And so we said, well, let's convene a conversation. So in this broader conversation of dashboard, what's bringing you to this conversation? So open up your chat. Give us a little bit of information. Tell us who you are. Tell us what the question is you need answered in this particular meeting. I see that we've got about 29 or 30 of you on the phone with us. So let's get talking. Get those hands warmed up, right? And get going. So what are we going to do today? In the context of our hour together, what we're going to do is we are going to talk about the what and the why of dashboards. We're going to talk a little bit about how to use dashboards, how you can make dashboards usable. And we're going to end with a checklist that we've discovered over time as we've worked with organizations and tried to do dashboards for our own organizations. And one of the things we're going to do at the very end also is Peter's been playing with some dashboard formats, and he's going to share with all of us some ideas there so that we're aware of what's going on. Okay? So I want to launch our first poll and ask what best describes where you are in the process. Go ahead, Peter.
Okay, I'm going to launch the poll. This is too exciting. Here we go.
Okay.
Poll number 2. So we don't want to launch poll number 2. We're going to launch poll number 1. Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay.
So tell us,
polling.
Do you have a visual dashboard and you're willing to share? Pick that answer. I have the data and report it, but not in a visual dashboard. Or I wish I had the data because I could report it. So, and remember, all of us are coming together as a safe community, so it's really okay to click any one of these. Okay. So I see on my screen, and we'll show you the results coming in just a moment. Let me give a few more seconds here for some folks to put it in. So basically we're looking to see as if you've started the process, but you need the visual aspect versus, gee, I got a bunch of pieces about it. And it's running, Peter, almost neck to neck. So let's show them.
Yeah. So it looks like we're running about 50-50, which is not surprising because what we have seen quite frequently in the world of chapters is that, first of all, just getting the data is really tough. And it's not just a matter of convincing people to share it in the first place. It's the problem that most chapters don't have it in the first place. For many chapters, here's their data system, a little bunch of Post-it notes. So ideally, we'd like to have good data, but then when you get the data, you want to be able to report it in a way that is visually informative. So that's what we're talking about today.
All right.
Okay. I'm going to close that poll. Good job.
So what is a dashboard?
What is a dashboard? Well, a dashboard ideally is a graphical representation of how things are working. And if you think about a car, What does it tell you right off the bat? How fast you're going. It's a visual display of the most important information on a single screen, so the information can be monitored at a glance. And again, we look at this in a way that helps the chapter leaders, helps the staff, helps the volunteers, helps whomever you're trying to communicate with, understand what's really, really important. So that's why the dashboard in the car, the most important thing is, am I moving or not? And do I have any gas left? Because if I don't have any gas left, I might not be able to keep moving. So, okay, let's go here. Okay. So you can do a variety of things with a dashboard. And again, assuming you have the data in the first place that you can use, but if you have that data, you can help identify opportunities. You can see where people have got it going on and perhaps could share that idea with others. You can inform decisions. So if we're trying to allocate resources, we want to know the best place to apply those resources. And if we see chapters are struggling in a particular place consistently across the system, that might be a place where we look for training and development to be expanded. We can detect the threats. We can see where people are having a hard time in perhaps geographic areas because of changes in demographics of the membership. And that, again, would allow us to reallocate resources or change the focus of the chapters. What are the chapters trying to do? Let's make sure they're doing the right thing for the right people the right way. And last but not least, we can drive behavior. We want to motivate people and keep them focused on the most important areas, i.e. moving the mission and serving the member. So, with whom are we sharing our data? And the audience for our data is a really important question one needs to ask. Are we talking about going out to the full membership? Are we talking about going strictly to our volunteer leaders, our chapter leaders? Is this something that's just for the board or something for internally for staff? And one of the neat things about many of these different systems is that you can look at all three by using different views. And so, for example, with a product like Tableau or even with Excel, you can create different views that show people what they need to see based upon their role in the organization. And again, always emphasizing what's really important. Where do we want to focus their energy so that they drive the organization in the way that's going to move the mission and serve the member. So we got another poll coming up here. So let's try this polling thing again. And we'll select poll number 2. And we will launch our polling. So regardless of the audience, what is your primary motivation for doing this? And you can select whatever applies here. Informational, support decision-making, motivational, drive behavior, or correctional, keep on track. And so we're in a race here to see what's going to land at the top. So informational so far is leading the charge. The popcorn's still popping though, so we're going to keep the microwave running until we don't hear any more popping. And it looks like the popping has declined somewhat. So why don't we end the polling and see where we sit. And it looks like the majority of the people on the call are looking at informational focus, supporting decision making. And some say, hey, let's motivate, let's get people pushing in the right direction. And then there's some people that say, hey, there's some people who aren't. Some chapters perhaps need to be rerouted. Okay, thank you.
So one of the things that we did was we went out to a couple of different associations and we asked them, like, how do we use the dashboards? And the reason why we asked those 3 questions was because the 3 ways that people said over and over again, it was, as Peter said, to inform, let us know what's going on, to motivate folks to do a better job, and to correct. So taking that idea that those 3 elements are so critical, we reached out to a number of associations who had some level of dashboard activity to ask them which of these were, top of mind. That led us to talk with Kathy Wasner from CFMA, which is the Construction Financial Management Association. What I loved about hers was a number of things about this conversation that were really wonderful. Part of it came from the question of the motivation. You see, when she got there, they had already been gathering all this data, but not using it. And one of the things that Kathy shared with me was that it would be, first of all, they could get more data if they could make it easier. But if they had the data and they were using it, they could make better decisions. And what I really loved about the fact is that she said they were looking for trends to help them hone support that they provide. So, for example, one of the things that they noticed was that folks were really struggling with the member recruitment. And so she's working with membership to create a toolkit that's specific for them. It was correctional. It was to help chapters improve. And so one of the things that they're doing is giving each chapter a report looking at their efforts against the average efforts. And it allows the folks to be able to say, wow, if this group can do it, let me reach out and find out a little bit more about that. And of course, motivational. So here's the really cool thing. They have something called their STAR program. And their STAR program is a subsidy of up to $3,000 per year per chapter. Now, they set this up largely from looking at the information that helped them understand that chapters were struggling in a couple of areas. Initially, it was how do we get some paid staff there, but then they expanded it. And you can use your subsidy on one of 5 key areas, including that staffing mechanism if you want. The thing is that in order for you to be able now to get that and to be able to really be engaged and connected to all the programs and supports CFMA have, part of doing that is being involved with this snapshot. So they've looked at this dashboard from an informational, from a correctional, and from a motivational standpoint. Now, one of the things that Kathy did was she did share with us some data. Now, we have anonymized this and randomized it, so this is not the actual data or the actual chapters, but we took basically the format that she is using, and we wanted to show it with you, both in terms of the way that she's using it, and then maybe an alternative view. Peter.
Okay, so let's start with how she collects it in the first place. And this is kind of cool because they have this form, and I'm showing you the Excel form right now, which basically is posted online, so it's a live online form, where the chapters can go in and get different amounts, get a different number of points depending upon what kinds of metrics they have met. And so she has a variety of metrics around participation in the national organization, looking at membership, and looking at education, scholarships, etc. And when the members key in a number, you know, if they get 5 points because they've got somebody on the board, it automatically tallies that up into their score. And that score, as that number grows, increases the likelihood that they could be eligible for that subsidy that we talked about. So this is all aggregated into a big spreadsheet, which I will show you in just a moment here, that looks like this. And now, this is great because you can sort of see how everybody's doing. But if you looked at this and tried to figure out, well, who's the top, who's the bottom, you could certainly sort these columns. But from a visual perspective, it's really hard to tell sort of, you know, who's got what going on. And so what I simply did was I took this particular spreadsheet and I dropped it, or I actually didn't drop it, I grabbed it with Tableau, and I said, okay, if we were to represent this graphically, how might we do this in such a way that we could see more clearly who's got it going on? So in this case, we can see, for example, the Inland Empire, Lansing, and New York Capital Region chapters in this particular subset. It's the B tier of their membership, of their chapters, has really got it going on in the membership and operations area. So they might be groups to whom one would look to see, well, how are they doing what they're doing? What's working really well for them? And then maybe the Greater Wichita chapter, which doesn't seem to have it going on quite as much in the membership area, how might we help them to look more like the Inland Empire, the Lansing, or the New York Capital Region chapter? So Peggy, let's turn it back over to you. And
okay, so I mean, again, we're just showing you some quick ideas and some quick options, not using the actual data. But at the end of the day, it comes down to a question of what are we measuring. And with CFMA, they were taking a look at some specific metrics that they had identified that were important to them around those engagement, operations, lots of checklist items. Folks, generally speaking, are going to be looking at membership as a key indicator. And in fact, in the benchmarking study, then that coming out shortly, the benchmarking study showed an increased focus on membership engagement as a key metric for chapters. But membership is one of them. The other buckets that we see quite regularly are financial, activity, what are they doing, what are they offering at that local level, perceptions about the chapter, perceptions about the national organization, perceptions as a whole about the profession, and very important, alignment. And that becomes a critical element if you're looking at the view from the headquarters staff very often. That alignment is around how are they aligning to the brand, how are they aligning to the strategic plan, to the messaging, and to the core beliefs of the organization. Now, we're not telling you what would be your measures, obviously, but these are the measures that are generally used. In any case, what you're trying to do is to, in those measurements, come to those key performance indicators, or KPIs. And when you're thinking about your KPIs, you want to think about them in terms of ones that are actionable, that have a common interpretation. In other words, we all know what we're talking about. Simple, transparent calculation, accessible, credible data. And even as you set all of those up, you're going to look for that perfect metric in the center. You cannot anyway be able to measure everything. So what do you actually want to hone in on is the question.
Can I go to Walmart and get KPIs?
Okay. Anyway, when you think of those things, which of these would you most like to benchmark in a dashboard? Now, the reason why we're asking this question, as you're thinking about it, and I'll get Peter to launch that poll for us, is because we're just curious to see, in terms of your own organization, what would be most important. We're not all going to measure everything. So do you think that your most important metric would be maybe membership? Maybe you would also say, and finance. Maybe it's activity, perceptions around satisfaction, net promoter score, ratings or comments, alignment. So you can pick as many as you want, remembering that at any given time in your association, one or more of these are going to be more important than the others, and focusing folks on what's going to make a difference is going to be able to, is going to make the difference. While you're all voting in there, I do see some questions about having access to the spreadsheet referenced. And what I'm going to do is some of it is definitely shareable. I'll get approval to share, and we'll share it back out to you guys.
Okay, so people are still logging in here with their answers, but it looks like maybe the popcorn stopped popping, so I'm going to end the polling and share the results. And it looks like membership is the winner. Yay, membership! Okay.
But interestingly, equally of interest, almost very, pretty close, is that whole activity, because obviously activity is going to lead to the engagement, and I think that's really important. Sometimes we're checking how many things that someone did, a checklist, but if we can really get deeper into understanding the variety of activity. So let's keep moving, Peter.
Yeah. Okay. Well, before we move on, I just want to bring up a key point here. I think one of the areas when we think about data that we often struggle with is there are things that we can count, but not everything that we can count counts. And so it's easy to count renewal and recruitment, right? Those are pretty straight up numbers that most cases, if your chapters are sharing their membership data with you, you can count. But engagement's sort of a fuzzy, right? So engagement tends to get tricky, particularly with chapters who are using these little post-it notes for their database. And so the question becomes, is there a good surrogate for that we can touch into? So sometimes we'll look at things like registrations as a surrogate for engagement, as a part of engagement. We can look at posts to a collaborate type space, et cetera. But the question is, what can we count? And that is often the difficult hump to get over when we think about the use of particular metrics and identifying those metrics. So let me stop sharing results here and go to our next slide.
So we had a great conversation with the Global Commercial Real Estate Association, and Aaron spoke with me about what they were doing. And now they've got a fairly sophisticated spreadsheet program in which they are tracking. But the reason why I wanted to highlight them for a moment is because of the process that they went through in terms of determining what they actually were going to look at. So at one point they had some 20 metrics, and what they said was, you know what? We have to pick the ones that are going to make a difference, that are going to give us some information that is actionable. Now, while they aren't all the way to the kind of graphical representation, they have done an awful lot of work. And one of the things that she does, and she says she creates a beast off a spreadsheet. I don't know if she's on, but incredible work. But what they do is she gathers all of these data points. They do a great job in pulling some of the engagement data out of their HireLogic and their own AMS. Then she gets registrations and she brings the data in and does a lot of other stuff and shares aggregate data by chapter size. So they have a number of categories, 5 categories, in which they put chapters by size. And she shows a median and a standard deviation for each of those metrics. Her sense, based on what my conversation was, simply that if you put chapters in sizes that make sense to them, right, that has the same kind of dollars, people, geographic kind of territory, and you help them see what the average is in the area and the standard deviation, it becomes both motivational as well as, of course, informational, but very critically trend-oriented and helps people understand. If there's a high performer, someone really on the outside of standard deviation, it helps. But bottom line, they knew that they had to hone in on key areas. And the areas that they looked at were, again, this engagement around membership, local participation, what were they doing at the local level, their leadership, brand recognition, and recruitment. Now, just notice for a moment that I thought it was really cool that of those areas, really the top 3 are talking about how are we engaging folks in the organization at that local level, and how does that actually build back into the national organization, and that value proposition gets to a limited number of checklist opportunities. So they did give us a spreadsheet, and again, we anonymized the information, did some work with it. Peter, let's take a look at what you found.
Okay, so if we go to their spreadsheet, you can see, first of all, there are lots of tabs inside of here, and I won't go through all the details, but they have some base numbers, and they track a variety of aspects of the chapter performance, simply looking, as you would expect, at their membership numbers, unique participation, which I think is a great number. Way too often, a chapter will say, hey, you know, we got 50 people to show up, and it's the same 50 that show up every time they do something, as opposed to really looking as a percentage of the entire membership, how many people are showing up at least once a year. How many are volunteering? How many are attending national events? How many are donors? How's the money doing as far as the organization goes? They look at details of meeting attendance at the fall and spring meetings, and they look at unique attendance for all events. And again, that unique number is critical, I think, to really understanding the extent to which a chapter is reaching a large proportion of its membership in the area it serves. And so they took all these numbers and they then put them into another spreadsheet where they showed them as percentages. And quite frankly, I was amazed. These are great numbers. I am very impressed with whatever they're doing to make their chapter system work. You're seeing very high participation numbers here as a percentage of the membership. Even if we go up to the large chapters, you're seeing very high participation here, and really extraordinary volunteering numbers, which I think are excellent numbers to see from many organizations. So, and again, but we're looking at a spreadsheet, so it's really hard to look at the spreadsheet and figure out, okay, what's working here, what's not working. There's a difficulty in seeing with ease how things are working in one place versus another. So again, I did the same thing. I went over to Tableau and I said, Tableau, help me get a clearer picture of who's got it going on how. And again, I will apologize to a certain extent, because I am not a Tableau expert by any stretch of the imagination. I wish I had somebody like Debbie King with me right now, because she could turn this into something absolutely phenomenal. But the neat thing that we were able to do with Tableau is give you a visual representation of those numbers we were looking at before, and you can see where certain groups have the majority of their funding coming from sponsorship and events, others less so. You can look at their event attendance percentages. And again, these are a little distorted because we don't have this rescaled, but it'll give you an idea of how they're doing relative to each other. And the neat thing about Tableau is I can go in here, and like I said, I want to look at some details on this particular group. I can go into all their specific numbers and see exactly how they're doing, and I can actually go into the underlying data for that particular group and see their entire row in the spreadsheet if I want to. So I'm sure this is making all of your eyes go back and forth way too many times, and you're getting a little dizzy and perhaps nauseous. So I'm going to turn the screen back over to Peggy.
Back over to Peggy, yeah. So, and again, I just want to make sure, because I don't want anybody to feel like, you know, these numbers are not completely accurate or completely aligned. We are really just trying to show how an association has pulled things together and how you might then take a spreadsheet, which can be mind-boggling, and create a graphical representation of it. But it allows you also to see how folks are doing in comparison to each other and also in comparison to goals. So as I talked with her, she had a couple of really cool lessons that I just wanted to make sure I shared. So this is a big project, and she really wanted folks to be able to buy into it, right? So the first thing she said to me was, they started with the task force, and they started with the task force, and the task force brought together to say, let's figure out what it is we really ought to be taking a look at. What are the numbers we want to look at in aggregate? How are we going to use them? And it was a really great conversation. They came up with a lot of options. They then whittled that down from there, and they got a board approval. So this was a really inclusive process, which is why I'm going to guess it's going to be, and it is really successful. And actually, every chapter gets a report back now again. She also suggested that as you are looking at which metrics to use, she said, get that feedback from members on what they value, what their priorities are. And I loved when she said that, because too often we focus on what is easiest for us to have a conversation with our leaders, or what our leaders think are important. And we need to go to the leaders, yes, but we also need to find out, what do members say is important about being involved and engaged in this association?
Yeah. Way too often we'll hear chapter leaders say, oh, well, I was at our meeting and all my friends were there and we had a great time and they think everything's great. And I'm going, well, those were all your friends. What about the rest of the members? What do they think?
Right. And so I think the degree to which, as she said, you can get those things involved. And third, she said, you know, one of the ahas to her was, where did they want to benchmark said data against chapters versus a constant? In other words, where is this not, it's subjective based on, you know, geography, culture, size, shape, and therefore we really want to help chapters, you know, sort of own and see how in the same group they're doing. But maybe there's just a goal, there's just a constant. We need to set this kind of, you know, line on the ground and have people meet it or exceed it. I thought that was really important, because at some point the benchmarking against the chapters is motivational for them and helps them see where they can improve or excel. But other cases, no, we have to help them understand where to go.
And typically you want to see the constant around key metrics like membership satisfaction, your net promoter score, participation, market penetration, things like that should be the same regardless of the size of the organization. Granted, for a large chapter, it might be more difficult to get 100% participation, but participation should be a key metric, whereas the number of events, the number of butts and seats, those kinds of metrics may vary depending upon both the size of the organization and the kinds of activities in which it engages. So necessarily having events and getting lots of people to attend those events may work for some chapters. Others may have different kinds of programming entirely, so the event metric may not make any sense to them, and they may not show up very well on that. But if they're driving satisfaction, they're driving participation, they're driving the net promoter score, hey, that's the way to go.
And, you know, in terms of figuring out that constant, a couple of associations we've worked with, they've set their constant as the net promoter scores. What do we get nationally? And they want chapters to be within that range, or be great if they exceeded. The same thing with retention numbers.
Right.
If we're running a national retention of, say, 85%, and those people that are engaged in a particular chapter are lower, then that's a place to reach. So anyway, however you do it, I think that I know she's open to talking with folks and helping. So as we come to a part of it now where we want to show you maybe just a little bit, push the envelope a little bit on some of these dashboard things, we want to talk a little bit about, let me get my thing to go, two elements of making a dashboard usable. We want to talk about design, and we want to talk about ease of use. So from a design perspective, there's 3 points we want to just kind of hone you in on. First of all is think in terms of keeping your eyes on the road. So you really want to focus attention where we're going. I was talking with someone, we were talking about the difference between best practice sharing and hackathon. And she said best practice sharing is looking backwards. The hackathon is looking forward, looking to the future. And to a large degree, part of what you want to do is make sure that it's helping you see where you're going as opposed to simply reporting on what we did the year in, year out. Secondly, let it tell a story. I mean, the whole idea here of bothering to go from that spreadsheet to a graphical representation is to help people be drawn into it and want to know the outcome, want to understand the journey. So it's that context, it's a little bit of color, and it's helping people see where the priorities. Like, I can miss on some of the things that are not as important if, in fact, what I'm doing is getting me to the next level. And third, it should show both goals and progress. And the reason why we say both goals and progress is if you only are showing where they are and that doesn't give them a visual image of where they're heading, it doesn't do that awesome in between of where am I on my journey and how close am I to goal. And this really allows you to celebrate. And I loved one of the groups that we looked at. Rather than having red, yellow, green on their dashboard, they used celebrate, monitor, and act now. So if you were below goal or below where you should be, there was red, but it was act now, meaning let's jump in and figure this out. If it was yellow, it was monitor, we're cruising. And if it was green, it was celebrate. So think also in terms of the design about this notion of couching it in terms that are truly motivational. Don't soft it, but for make sure that we're being motivational and we're not turning these very time-strapped, very overworked volunteers in many cases. It's also about the management of it, and I want to mention a couple of quick things. First is make sure, as the degree that you can, is it's easy to aggregate the data, draw the trends, share the results. Large part of this, when we talked with Erin, she was talking about it's a beast of a spreadsheet. You sit down with your team, your IT, your whoever's running your AMS, if it's someone different, your CFO or whoever, and talk about how can we pull the data points into a place that allows us to aggregate it. I think the most critical thing that I saw was this notion of, the dashboard's only going to be as good as the data you can get in. You want to have as much of it that you have access to. But at the end of the day, the stuff you have to collect, you have to make it as easy as possible. CFMA has done that with a really cool online form. In fact, one of the neat things when I was talking with Kathy over there was she was talking about the first thing when she got in there was she said, we've got to make this easier. And you can go to their website at CFMA and you can get right into this URL here. And it has chapter benchmarking and awards. And what you'll notice is that they have a worksheet that you can download. They also have an online form, and she suggests that folks download the worksheet, fill it out, and then go to the online form and just throw the data in. Now, the cool thing is each and every year, she analyzes every one of those points to say, what can I give the chapter? What can I fill in versus what do I have to have them fill in? And then she said just from 2019 to 2020, there's about, I think, 3 more points where she's realized, hold a second, I'm now getting that information on a regular basis. I can fill that in.
Yeah, I always hate
making it easy.
I said, I always hate it when somebody asks me to fill out a form with questions to which they should know the answers. And I'm going, why are you asking me this? Yeah. And why do we want to waste our volunteers' time asking them questions that the answers to which we should know?
Yeah. Actually, can you show them the CFMA form? Sure. Yeah. She did share it with us, and I know they're interested and willing.
Yeah. So this is the one we showed a little bit earlier, and we can we'll check with Kathy, and perhaps we can. Well, actually, you can go online and see the entire form. So. And like I said before, it's fairly simple to fill out. You collect your numbers and you put your numbers in here. So, say you got 2 of these and you get 8 points there and whatever, 3 points here and then so on. And it automatically tallies the total up here. And so it looks at a variety of areas, as I mentioned before, around participation at the national level and membership participation at the local level. And I think this is really the key area from my perspective. I think this, from a chapter perspective with respect to performance is critical, because we want to make sure that our people are engaged, that we have good market penetration, we have good membership participation, and that we're really putting out the kind of activities at the local level that attract a wide range and a deep level of engagement from the members.
So I just saw a question asking if there's an incentive for this award, and so I went back to my quick notes, and I know Kathy could give you more details on this, but part of what they do is they do tie it back to that STAR program, which is cool. But they have a number of awards that they give that have some extra gimmies to them, including the Chapter of the Year award and a couple of other things. So they really do tie their data back into rewarding and motivating folks. So thanks for that question. And I will, I know Kathy said that she's happy to talk with folks, so I will make sure that we share out some information.
Okay, so why don't we take a minute here, and I want to go through this checklist. What I'd like to do is show you first a set of metrics that I think are probably the metrics you want to focus on the most, and then perhaps some different ways that those metrics can be presented, thinking about the different audiences whom we're trying to reach. So if we take a look at this guy right here, and this is looking at key metrics or KPIs that we might want to consider for our chapters, and I've divided it into 3 columns: needs improvement, sustaining, and high performing. And we look at things like member satisfaction, a value gap, and a value gap is usually assessed through a survey where we ask members how important something is and the extent to which that thing is being addressed by the chapter, and the difference between those 2 scores would give you your value gap. Looking at participation and membership penetration, how deeply have we penetrated the market for whatever that profession or trade is in the space where the chapter operates. These are really key to the organization as a whole with respect to its ability to identify whether or not the chapter is serving the member. And if we have high scores here, if we have consistently satisfaction rates in excess of 80%, value gap is less than 10%, participation is 90% or higher. Remember what the CR folks were doing? We were seeing great participation rates there, and market penetration was really high. And then we also look at how that activity is supported with good leadership. So we need to see succession, a deep volunteer pool, and we need to see planning. So these are functional areas that are critical to driving the membership engagement and services. And this doesn't mean we want to ignore all the operational pieces that an organization needs to put in place in order to function properly. So we'll look at things like communications and organization and finance and brand compliance and data management and all that fun stuff. But all these things really don't make any difference at all if we aren't doing this. And that's why I think when we think about the dashboard, what's most important, that's what we want to put front and center. We can have all those other things in the dashboard eventually, but we want to have them sort of in the background, kind of like all those little red lights that only come on when your car is about to explode. So let's take a look at how a dashboard for this might look in Tableau. And here I have an example where I looked at dual membership, how many people are members of both the chapter and the local, what's participation look like, what's the value gap look like, what's their volunteer pool like, how many activities they're running, and what are their total member counts. So you can see from a graphical perspective that the Los Angeles chapter is not doing nearly as well as the Atlanta chapter in terms of dual membership, and you're seeing that reflected in participation. And those 2 things would logically go hand in hand, right? So if you're getting lots of participation, that means that people are finding reasons to participate, and they're more likely to have a dual membership. Same thing with the value gap. If what people feel is important is being addressed by the chapter, then obviously the value gap should be low, which would be the case for the Atlanta group, and high for the folks in Los Angeles who don't really seem to have it going on. Then we look at their volunteer pool, and we see sort of a mixed rating here. So the Houston group is doing reasonably well in terms of dual membership and participation, but their volunteer pool is relatively small. So if I was a chapter, a component relations professional, I would look at this and go, okay, so what's going on here? Do we have a handful of people that are doing all the work? And at what point are they going to fall over and die, and there'll be nobody to replace them? And I would want to go and visit with them and say, hey, you guys are doing a great job. How are we going to make sure that you've got people to back you up when you decide to walk away? We also look at the number of activities they're running, and they're only running 7. Obviously, they're good activities, but maybe the reason they're only running 7 is because they don't have enough volunteers to actually get more in play. And then, of course, their total members, we can look at the total members against the goal. So that's looking at the group as a whole. And this is a sort of a small sample that we're playing with right here.
Right.
And then we go ahead.
And then, that's what I'm saying, because when you said the number of activities, do you remember back when we did the dashboard indicators and we talked with 30-some associations, and they said when they looked at their highest performing versus anyone else, many of them, it wasn't the number of events that they were doing. And in fact, the high performers could be doing as few as 4 or 5. For one organization, they said that the magic number was actually 8, not 12. And some of the ones that were struggling to put on 12 were struggling in other ways. And so you could even look at that in this kind of a context and say, wait a minute, the people that are doing well, and I'm not saying that's what this says one here, but if you did this, you might find out, well, listen, the people that are doing well really only have between 6 and something, so let's do that.
Right, and that could be a metric you would find when you look at your groups. I just talked to a CRP from another association a few weeks ago, and what they found was very interesting. They were looking at their renewal numbers, and they found that the number of events that were done by the chapters correlated directly with the retention numbers, regardless of whether or not the national organization did any events in that space. So the frequency of chapter events had a direct one-to-one relationship to the number of, or the retention that they got from their membership in that area. So that's an organization, obviously, for which local activity is critically important. And that's not going to be the same for every organization. But I think that's the kind of thing that you can identify when you have a representation, a graphical representation of the data that looks like this. Now, what's neat about Tableau is I can go in there, I can say, okay, let's look at all these chapters, how they're doing with their membership, for example, relative to the goal for their membership. So you can see that in the case of Los Angeles, they have a very high goal here. It's because there are a whole lot of their prospective members in the space where they operate, but they're only at 286. So they've got a ways to climb yet. Whereas in the case of the Atlanta group, remember how well they were doing. The Miami group, they were doing very well as well. They've actually exceeded their goal. And again, we're looking at what's the potential in the area, and that's the basis upon which we set the goal. So that's the neat thing about Tableau is we can really look at this and go, okay, how is the group as a whole doing? Then the other thing, getting back to our audience, when we get back to our audience, we can't share all of this necessarily with all the other chapter leaders. We may want to be more selective, or we may want to give more detail to a chapter leader for a specific chapter, in which case I would say, okay, for the Chicago guys, here's how you are on membership penetration, volunteer pool, participation, and satisfaction relative to the goal that was established for each of those metrics in your particular chapter. So again, thinking about the audience, if I'm the chapter, the Chicago chapter leader, I want to understand how I'm doing, our chapter is doing relative to our goal. And then we want to figure out, okay, what do we need to do to get our volunteer pool up or get our membership penetration up, get more participation, and move that satisfaction number from 65% to 85%. Ultimately, if we can get our chapters focused on those kinds of things, that's what's going to help us at the national level really move our membership numbers right through the roof. So, when you're building a dashboard, here's a quick checklist to think about. First and foremost, what are the strategic goals for your components? What do you want these guys to do at the end of the day? And way too often, what Peggy and I see is goals that are really focused around organizational metrics. Did you file your papers? Are your bylaws in order? Did you sign the affiliation agreement and that kind of stuff? And that's, I don't want to suggest that's not important, but that's not strategic. That's really tactical. We want to focus on the extent to which our organization is looking to move a particular needle for the profession or the trade, and the extent to which members are being served and the mission moved. What are the strategic goals for your dashboard? Do you want to inform? Do you want to motivate? Do you want to correct? What do you want to see this dashboard do for you? What are you trying to change in terms of how the relationship works with your chapters? And then let's look at this issue of design. Who are the audiences? And as you saw there with that last example, with a product like Tableau, and again, I'm not trying to sell Tableau, and I'm not a Tableau expert by any stretch of the imagination. There are lots of products out there that can do this kind of thing. But when you think about your audience, how do you want to present this to them? So if I'm the national person, I want to see the entire system. If I'm the individual chapter, I want to see how is my chapter doing against the average, against the goal. I want to understand where my opportunities are to do things better. And I do want to see how other chapters are doing in specific areas, because I may pick up the phone and call Houston and say, Houston, I've got a problem. Can you help me? So what are the performance goals? Way too often we see everybody measuring things, but not measuring those things against a goal. And it really doesn't motivate anybody if all I see is where I am. I want to see where you want me to be, or quite frankly, I want to see where I want to be relative to where I am. And then what are the visual priorities? Again, when you hop in the car, the first thing the car tells you is, are you moving or not? And then it tells you some other things, but the number one priority from the dashboard perspective is, am I moving and how fast am I going? Because the police officer will not believe you if you come in and say, well, my dashboard didn't tell me anything about how fast I was moving. And then what are the remedies and solutions? Ideally, if we have this thing set up well, if a chapter sees itself struggling with its volunteer pool, they could click on that particular bar, and all of a sudden it would take them to what? The chapter leader resource portal, whatever you might have in place. This says, here are some ways that you can boost your volunteer participation. And then, of course, what's the refresh frequency? Way too often, and we still struggle with this quite a bit, we depend upon the chapter leaders to fill out a form, and then we have to take all that data, load that into something else, and then we have to load that into something else so it can be graphically presented. Ideally, we want to be in a place where this can be real-time data that requires as little of a lift by the volunteers, because they're not going to lift very much, and it's refreshed on a regular basis, so when I go and see the data, I'm seeing current data, not stuff from 2 years ago.
And I just want to make a real quick thing about that refresh for frequency. We've talked with a couple of the vendors out there, and they're beginning to build real-time dashboards. So the degree to which you can get your chapters all on the same AMS platform, whether you're talking about a community brand, your membership, or maybe it's everybody's using Higher Logic as a online community, whatever. Take a look, and in fact, if you're using any of those folks, take a look at that, because when we talk with them, number of them, and we're not here to sell any of these things, so we're not showing any of those, but they've got some opportunity here to do that refresh frequently. Right.
And last but not least, and this goes back to a certain extent to who are your audiences, what are the views that we have? And so if I'm a chapter leader, I want to be able to see that how is my chapter doing? How is my chapter doing relative to the system as a whole? And then I want to be able to look specifically at where are the areas where I'm perhaps struggling, and most importantly, can I see a correlation between the areas where I'm struggling and the results I'm trying to achieve? So if I see things like we talked about that Houston chapter that seem to have it going on, but their volunteer pool was small, if I'm a chapter leader from the Houston chapter, I'm wanting, okay, I need to fix that, because I can't sustain this as an individual chapter leader. I need to find some way to get more people to come in and help me out. So all these elements of design are critical to making your system work well. But I think we'll close with a quote from one of my favorite quotes from a French writer, Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. He said, "Perfection is achieved not when there's nothing more to add, but when there's nothing left to take away." Perfection is achieved not when there's nothing more to add, but when there's nothing left to take away. In other words, let's really focus on what's important and use that to inform, to motivate, and to improve.
Excellent.
So what are your questions?
So yeah, do we have any additional questions? I've seen a number of folks asking about the spreadsheets, and I saw that BillHighway was quick on the draw too. We gave you the link in the chat box right to the CFMA information. You can go ahead and take a look at that. I'll check in with our other folks, and we'll package some stuff together, and as long as you are on this webinar and you registered, we'll work to get that out for you. So any other questions? We've got, according to my clock, we've got a couple minutes. We went through all this stuff, a little fast to make sure we could cover it. Do you guys have any questions, any other comments coming up? I am just checking back to see. I see many of you said that that you weren't using anything like this. Okay.
And just so you know, Tableau actually has a free, at least they used to have a free online version, so you can go online and use it just as a software as a service. It's somewhat limited, and you don't perhaps have all the control you would like to have. The seats aren't cheap, but it's a hell of a product, excuse me, a heck of a product. Actually, it might be a hell of a product too, I don't know. But at any rate, it's a great product, and there are, like I said, a number of programs like that out there that you might want to take a look at.
So one of the questions we have is, do you know any other programs besides Tableau? And I know that that we did hear in the conversation that there was there's some really good Excel programs that you can use. So in other words, there's some smart sheets. In fact, go up to smart sheet. They have a number of dashboard templates in which you have to, then fill in the data that you want. So smart sheet. Now, most of the smart sheet, again, is of course a subscription. You can pull down some templates for free. So that's a place to start. In terms of Tableau, is there nonprofit pricing? Do you know? We have.
Yes, there is.
Yes, there is actually. Yes.
Nonprofit pricing, yes.
Yeah. Melissa uses SurveyMonkey, and actually, I've been playing with the SurveyMonkey. They have a dashboard now, and you can decide which of the charts you want to show, and you can actually create a little report that is a visual report. I don't know, Melissa, if that's what you're doing, but maybe you can. Share that with the group if you've got that. I think that's really great. Someone else that they were using Open Water as facilitating the process of pulling the data in. It's not so much of a report. Oh, Jill, I love it. So Jill says, yes, use SurveyMonkey and Excel. It's the dynamic duo. Absolutely. Hey, are we the dynamic duo too?
Yeah.
Anyway.
But I want to emphasize something here. First of all, there are 6,000 different versions of business dashboard software out there. So you can take a look at them, and you're going to have to pick one and learn it, because none of this stuff is necessarily simple. I always look for software that has lots of users, because that usually means that somebody's beat on it quite a bit. So you'll have some sense of the extent to which they fixed most of the problems. But the other part that's really important here is the extent to which that software can look at your existing data system and read from it. And that's one of the really cool things about Tableau. It can read from an AMS, it can read from Excel, it can read from any data source that you might have out there. And most importantly, you can post it online. And what we don't want to do is send a chapter leader a PDF. We want them to be looking at something where they can log in and go, boom, oh, I see how I'm doing. And so that's where I would argue that whatever software you use, make sure that it has it can read from different data sets quite flexibly, and you can run it online so that everybody can see whatever view they need to see to understand how they're doing relative to their goals.
And I loved it. One of the things that Melissa mentioned was, and other departments can use it too. Right. I noticed that when I worked with NCA CPA, so they're the North Carolina CPAs, they used Tableau for a lot of their reporting, and when they applied it to the chapter conversation we were having, it really helped us understand where engagement was working, where it wasn't, and where we need to make some changes. But the entire organization was harnessing the power of Tableau, and so we're not here to sell Tableau, but if you get a business dashboard service, using a cloud service, and you have that capability, I think, Peter, your point that you made, and so I just want to emphasize it again, is the opportunity to have something that is reading from your data sources. Right. Because if I have to bring it into Excel, I am now making, as Aaron said, a beast of a spreadsheet. Right. So having that ability to read. So this could be that if this is something you wanted to do, is you go to a couple of other departments that are looking for a powerful business dashboard, and you convince them, and then you get a chance to use it. Right. Any other questions? I mean, I think at the crux of it, at the end of the day, this is the most important thing: is how are we going to take this data? What tools are we going to use for this data? And I'll ask, and you guys type in on the chat. This is something that we think is an important topic. Maybe we should bring it back to CEX. In our October meeting. Good, Karen. We're delighted that that it was great. We'll keep taking a look at the chat, so please feel free, guys. We got 6 minutes left. I want to just do a quick update on a couple of things that are coming up. Yes, Chapters Can Drive Growth Workshop is Washington, D.C., Wednesday, July 10th. This is a half-day meeting. We are pulling together some really great examples, but most importantly, some steps to follow in terms of how you can engage your chapters as a channel on this whole membership conversation. And part of what we'll be looking at in terms of the conversation is engagement, retention, and acquisition or sales, and are the chapters, where do you really want your chapters to weigh in? Registration is open for that, so that's Wednesday, July 10th. We're going to be actually at the ASAE headquarters on I Street, which is very convenient to Metro for those of you that are in the area. Or if you want to come in from Chicago, jump into National, jump on the Metro and come on over and see us. Okay? Anyway, there is the address there for you, billhighway.co/association/events. Also, I guess most of you know about this. It'll be the 3rd annual coming up on Friday, October 18th, 2019, the Association Component Exchange, 7:30 to 4:30. If you were there the first year and came back the second year, you know it was a different event. And if you come back the third year, you'll find it's different again. We've got some really cool things that are doing, including a brand new location, the Grand Hyatt Washington. It gives us more space.
Yep, and there's a Metro station right in the hotel on the Red Line, so you can hop right off and come right on inside. And every year we do this, I like sex more. What can I say?
Yes, Jill, thank you. It is the best event ever. And finally, of course, we do have the early bird pricing. The Sleepy Bird pricing doesn't kick in for a little while longer. So, if you're the early bird, go ahead and get it at $199. Hey, this has been a great conversation. Really appreciate it. We promise to take a look at what of those examples we can share. The CFMA example has already been shared. Thank you, Mark. We're delighted it's thinking about strategy and member value importance. So,
yes, it looks like it's that time of day when we say, thank you.
Thank you. Have an awesome rest of the day.